Welcome to the Chaos and Light podcast. I am your host, Angela Levesque, and on today's episode, we have the amazing Andrew Martin back on the program, sort of in a co-hosting situation. Andrew is a personal transformation guide and energy intuitive, and we are going to be exploring ritual creation, ceremonies, our multidimensionality, maybe even touch on dreams. We'll see what we get to today. Many of you know Andrew has been on before. Him and I are both interested in subjects of spirituality, consciousness, personal growth. And so we decided it would be fun to get together every once in a while and just kind of bounce some ideas back and forth. If you haven't been to the Chaos and Light website, please do. We have new guided meditations and events and articles, all kinds of stuff up there, new stuff coming out every single week. So go to chaosandlight.com if you haven't checked that out. Do you believe in synchronicity and synergy? That when people share, connect, and collaborate from an authentic space, amazing things can and do happen? Then check out the Chaos and Light community, an online space for spiritual seekers that supports personal growth and gives you a frequent touch point to stay connected to your spiritual core. Join a group, attend a gathering, be inspired by our Muse feed, all in a politics-free, ad-free environment. So dive deep into your spirituality at chaosandlight.com. Connect, inspire, expand. Okay, well, as I said, I am here today with Andrew Martin. If you want to find out more about him, you can go to andrewmartin.energy, as well as check out his YouTube channel, search Andrew Martin Energy as well. And you put up things fairly regularly, sort of transitioning maybe.
Yeah, I am in sort of a U-turn, or I guess a pivot with my YouTube channel. So it is becoming more regular, and I'm finding new ways to reach out to my audience. I basically just did a shift in how I delivered information and what exactly information I was sharing. So a little bit of a shift, but yeah, you can count on at least once a month you'll get a new video from me. But really the best way is sign up for my newsletter. Like if people go to my website and just subscribe, because I do everything in my newsletter.
Yes.
So
I am a subscriber. I agree.
Thank you. I concur.
Okay. So you recently, it was how long ago was that recorded? The multidimensional.
That conversation with Washayla was last year. I believe it was about this time actually last year. And she was hosting a summit, Ascension in the Multidimensional Self, I believe was the name of it, something along those lines. And she approached me and asked me to participate. And that was the interview that I did with her last year. And then she has recently started a podcast, and she's using those old interviews as sort of the intro material. So she just reached out to me a couple of days ago and was like, hey, I just reposted this. I was like, oh my gosh, perfect. There's something I can share with my audience. Yes. So listening to it, it's funny because that was one I had not really listened to. I think I remember sort of fast forwarding through bits of it. I don't remember why I wasn't really particularly interested in listening to it or didn't have the time, but having listened to it again recently, I was like, wow, there's a lot of really interesting information in here. I'm definitely going to share this one.
Yeah. And you guys spoke briefly on the topic of multidimensionality. I mean, it was kind of the overall theme, but you really got into the meat of it. And I loved what you said about, getting in touch with that through our senses. And that's a way that you can sort of build on that idea, is by realizing that we are sensual beings. And that's something that we talked about for a whole episode here. But you mentioned something about the fractals, which I was hoping that she would maybe ask a little bit more on, because as soon as we start talking about fractals and sacred geometry and kind of the building blocks, at least in my opinion, of what multidimensionality means, I get very interested. So I wanted to see if you could speak on that a little bit.
Yeah. So the way that I view everything really is from an energetic and geometric perspective. Like when I look at someone's field, when I look at someone's energy, I see geometry. When I see an imbalance in someone's field, I see it first in the geometry. And that happens in a myriad of ways. And so for me, it's all about patterns and geometries and the recurrence of that. And fractals are, beautiful examples of this, of how you can zoom in or out on any part of a fractal, and you will find that same shape, that same pattern, that same geometry, essentially, and anywhere else in the design. So to me, when we're talking about fractals and we're talking about energy and sort of how we move through energetic spaces internally, right? If we're talking about multidimensional traveling or accessing multiple dimensions, it's kind of hard to sit here and go, oh, well, here I am sitting in a chair in A dimension. Now I want to move to B dimension. Okay, well, how do I do that? What even is a dimension, right? So it's kind of like we just sort of stop before we even get started. So the way I look at everything is it's a fractal experience. And we see this in nature all the time, right? The same shape in our lungs is found in the trees, and the same shape in our cells is found in a flower or whatever. And you spoke about sacred geometry, and we look at sacred geometry in the Platonic solids, and we see that pretty much everything is built from the same, like 5 shapes, essentially, or 7, however many there are. So when I'm talking about the fractal expression relative to multidimensionality, it's about the geometry and the energetics of the experience. So when you are exploring multidimensionality, and what I shared in the interview with Washayla was that the quickest way that I perceive we can begin to explore our multidimensional nature, which I believe is just innate and inherent, is through our inner landscape. We have the 5 senses that we can all agree that we have. There are other senses, but we're not going to talk about that today. So the 5 senses that we all have, or presumably we all have, these are all different levels of awareness. These are all different dimensions, because essentially that's all a dimension is it's just a different layer of awareness. So if you want to begin exploring your multidimensionality, you go inside and you start to pay attention to, okay, what do I hear? What do I see? What do I touch? What do I feel or smell or taste? And I had shared a quick exercise. You can begin to explore it by saying, okay, for the next 5 minutes, I'm only going to focus on what I hear. The next 5 minutes, I'm only going to focus on what I see, and really zeroing in on specific senses to the exclusion of the other ones. And this is essentially a way just to kind of flex those muscles and start to create that muscle memory of like, oh, wow, when I move through the world from a auditory sense perspective, it's much different than when I move through it through a sense, a feeling perspective, or a visual perspective. So when I was talking about fractals, when I look at the geometry of someone exploring their inner dimensions, the 5, 6 we were born with, it is geometrically and energetically the exact same process as moving from, say, the 4th dimension to the 5th dimension. It's just a bigger leap, because essentially you're going beyond just your tight and tidy and cozy little inner landscape, and you're beginning to travel out. So essentially, that's how I view it. It's the same thing with emotions, right? Joy always feels like joy. If we could snapshot the geometry of joy, it will always look the same. It's just that some joys are like, ooh, yay, they have my favorite ice cream too. Oh my God, I just won $10 million. They look the same, but one is just much bigger. One is much smaller. But from a geometric perspective, they're identical.
Very interesting. So I was shown one time, just in a channeling session, that, so there's sort of the beginning of singularity consciousness. And from there, the next layer of awareness is the geometry, like we talked about the Platonic solids. And through magnetic attractive forces, those start to form things. And eventually we move from the space of universal consciousness out into individuated consciousness. So moving from source into the individual, and that's the experience of the universe getting to know itself is by, but it starts with that geometry. But one thing that I, even the way that I describe that, it seems like you said, like it's, we see it separately. And what it really is just like, we can tap into that place where that awareness exists. It's like sort of like a door. We can open the door and we can see, like you said, the geometry, or we can open the door to our auditory senses, or we can open the door and it's just that movement of our awareness into that space. And so when I think of multidimensionality, it's being able to maybe hold some of those awarenesses together. So in a mindfulness practice, we could talk about, okay, you follow the breath and you pay attention and you have that experience and awareness of the breath. And then you could say, okay, bring your attention and thought to your mind. And then at some point you could pull out your awareness a little bit more and see if you can hold both your mind and your body in your awareness. And then can you pull it out a little bit further and hold your mind, body, and now your field into that awareness? And then you can keep moving out, but it's just a doorway that you're looking through. It all exists all the time. And it's where we put our attention and the degree to which we can hold multiple layers of that awareness in a single space. Does that make sense?
Totally. And that is perfect. And that's what I actually said. And I think in the interview with Washayla was that multidimensionality is essentially the ability to focus in multiple places at the same time. And I have a similar experiment that I do actually, and it's just a visual one that anyone can do. And you basically just find a place, where you can just sit and see sort of at least a 180-degree view. And you look straight ahead, focus on something in front of you. And then, so you look at, find a spot on the wall right now I'm looking at, and then you just imagine 45 degrees out to the right, find something in your periphery on the right side. And now look at the thing in front of you, and now the thing at 45 degrees to your right. And then add now 45 degrees to your left. Now hold the thing in front of you, the thing to the right, and the thing to the left. And I've actually gotten to the point, and I practice this a lot. People think I'm crazy because I do it at airports. I'm just staring at the wall, trying to watch my periphery as well. But I've gotten to the point where I can hold about 4 points in my visual field and see them all at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
One other thing I wanted to pick up on is you talked about the geometry of joy, and it made me think of, I can't remember. He's a Japanese scientist, and he looked at the water. And he
Emoto was his name?
Yeah.
Isaru Emoto?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I should know. I live in Japan.
I know you're in Japan. Just open your window. Who's the guy with the water? They'll know.
So when you see, that is an interesting concept to me. When you're peering into, because I don't see the geometry. I know that it's there, but it's not the way. And we're going to talk about different ways that we connect and different ways that we can have that experience in a little bit. But if you were to see me in a state of joy and see somebody else in the state of joy, that geometry would look the same?
No, for you, it would be the same. So within the experience of Angela, her joy is always the same geometry. Now, certainly we'd probably find, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about that before. But if we looked at a snapshot of Andrew's joy and a snapshot of Angela's joy, I have no doubt we would find very similar frequencies, and we'd probably find the same core geometry. I think what we would find is the little additions, the little gildings, the frippery, the details would be different. But yeah, I believe without a doubt that if I could snapshot emotions, and I think we probably can, I'm sure there's some camera somewhere that someone has figured out to photograph emotional resonance. I know that we would see my favorite ice cream is the same as I won $10 million. It's just, they're smaller and, it's a different sized experience.
And what does blockages look like? What do
that
maybe
looks like
beliefs?
A bruise. That looks like either like a bruise. It looks like it's sort of the geometry is indented. And that is usually something that is acquired rather than something that you were born with. If I look at geometry that someone was born with, it looks like calcification. It just looks like white alkaline mud just kind of clumped on the side of the structure. Because when I look at the field that's vital and vibrant and balanced, it's like crystalline scaffolding. It is transparent, super, super balanced, and you can see stuff moving in and out of it and through it all the time.
That is fascinating to me. I love hearing how different people, I know a lot of people who do work within the psychic space. We'll just use that. It's not a good term, but you understand what I'm saying, right? And the way that information comes to you is so different that it comes to me. It's so different that it comes to somebody else. And I just find that to be a really fascinating topic, that we all have these different ways of kind of peering into non-ordinary reality.
Yeah. I love it too. And it's so funny because whenever I hear of someone who has a way of perceiving that I don't, or that I haven't activated or nurtured or whatever, I'm always a little jealous. Like I remember years ago, I had friend with this guy I was friends with this guy who's an angel communicator. And so he works a lot with angels and a lot with ascended masters, specifically Jesus and Mother Mary. And we were just hanging out one day and he was like, do you see that over there? And I was like, what? He's like, it's Jesus. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah. He's like, I see him like walking. I was like, I want to see Jesus. Why can't I see Jesus? So I totally get that. Like I have that same thing. Like I am fascinated by someone who connects in a way that I'm just like, what? How do you do that? Yeah. It's amazing to me.
So with the geometry, was that something that just showed up one day? Is that something, to use your word, that you nurtured? Has that always been kind of your inclination to see things?
At first it was, I would say initially everything turned on. It was not geometry. It was not visual at all. And I also want to clarify that when I say it's visual, it's not like, oh, I see your geometry like I see my hand. It's an inner viewing. Some people I know do see it like you see your hand. That is not how I work. Who knows? Maybe it will eventually get to that point someday, because what I find is that in the beginning, it would just be like, I was looking through a peephole I was in a really dark room looking through a peephole that was dimly lit, and I'm trying to see what's going on through the peephole. And that was initially when I first started doing this work, what I would see. And I would get sort of inklings and I would feel, things in the body. And honestly, in the beginning, it was kind of like poking in the dark. It was like pin the tail on the donkey. Like, I think I found it. And it was really just me getting over my own fear and my own insecurities and doubts about what I was doing and blah, blah, blah. But eventually, and this has been probably within the past 2 years, that the view has become much bigger and much clearer. For a while, it was very objective. Like I use this example all this time. Like if I say apple, immediately you can imagine an apple in your mind. So that was sort of where it went. And then it's only been recently in the past couple of years. Interestingly, and I never stopped to think about this, but a lot of my personal meditations and my personal practices have been around drawing sacred geometry and working directly with it. So I have a sense that triggered some kind of reawakenings within, but the viewing of the geometry and seeing it in that way is relatively new.
For myself, I see a lot of archetypes. So I see a lot of symbolism, and I can feel or sense the story around it. And I also get a lot of animals that show up and work with me and assist me in the guidance for people. And I think this will take us into our next conversation. Do you have an on and off switch for this? Like when you sit down, like, of course, as somebody who is energetically inclined or intuitive or psychic, whatever the word you want to use, you're going to just pick up stuff because you're attuned. Like we talked about having that awareness. But when you sit down to do that work, do you have specific invocations or what I call the on switch, that it means like, okay, this is me moving from sort of my ordinary experience, my ordinary reality, into, okay, now I'm sitting down and I'm doing this work?
Yeah. I love that question. I don't as much anymore because it used to be very important to me to separate that. And when I first was going through kind of my initial awakening, what I call the spiritual boot camp in the very beginning, I was still working a full-time job. And so with my team, I created this visual cue, which is me punching a time clock. And so, because they were waking me up like anywhere from like 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. And sometimes it was all of those. And I finally one day was like, I work full time. Unless you're going to deliver me the winning lottery numbers between 12 midnight and 6 a.m., unless it's 911, someone's going to frickin' die, I'm off the clock. And so I would visually punch that clock. And the minute that I created that, they were like, oh, okay, cool. And no more wake ups in the middle of the night. So I used to have very specific, and I still do to a degree. Essentially what I do now is once I'm done with the day, I essentially just set the intention that anything I picked up from a client or from a group is going back to them. And anything perhaps that sort of, spooled out from me, I'm calling back. And so it's just Andrew to Andrew, client to client, or group to group. And then I just create that separation. But in terms of like just kind of walking around day to day, I don't really turn it off anymore. It's always there. It's always aware. What I have been able to do is learn when it's unimportant Like just because I get a hit on what's happening with someone doesn't, okay, big deal. So what? I can look at the weather and what's happening in Japan. Doesn't mean that, I need to pay attention to it or do something about it. So unless it's within the construct of a client session, or on the rare occasion when I get the very clear message that, no, you need to say something to this person. Other than that, I don't really draw those lines anymore.
That's interesting. I think part of mine is so I don't do live reads. I can't, because the way that I connect is I go into a deep meditative space. I have this place that I've created where I invite a person's higher self up there, and I'll connect in that way. And like I said, sometimes I'll see a lot of symbolic things show up. There'll be some communication, but it's all really deep in meditation. Or I'm doing automatic writing, which is really creepy to do in front of people.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, you could do the whole show, right? You could do the just do the rolling eyes and just give them a show.
And so I do have very significant, very specific on-off switch. So that doesn't mean that I don't pick up stuff, and certainly I do pick up stuff as I'm moving around. But I create space when I do that work. So it's very intentional, and I decided to do that because I've seen a lot of people who do this work that are always, because they're always on, they're so sensitive to everything else. So it's crowds, it's lights, it's noise, it's food, it's all of these things that they become this really heightened being that now is so sensitive to everything. And I think for sure people who are more empaths, that's a much bigger issue. So I was always like, I want to have that on and off switch, that this is my time when I'm connected. This is when I am here and open to receiving that. Again, that doesn't mean that I don't receive stuff other times. And because I do my work in the deep meditation, I do, create space. And even if I have multiple readings to do or connections or whatever, I'll create my sacred space, and then each person I disconnect from, and then I reconnect with somebody else, but the space is always open at that point.
Yeah, I love that. I remember and this reminds me of that, in the beginning I used to have a place that I went. And I think that changed when I started bringing that, because I used to go to a place and it kind of felt like Olympus to me. It was like very, Doric columns and very lots of alabaster. And it just seemed very much like, I don't know, something out of, Paradise Island or Clash of the Titans or something. But at some point I began to bring that temple within. There was a turning point where I stopped finding a place up there and it was a dropping in. And once I made that switch to now the temple or the space being internal, and I've never thought about this before until now, once I made that switch from seeking the space internally, I found that I didn't have to turn the switch off anymore. I don't know why that is, but yeah, I totally get that. The not wanting to pick it all up. And I'm really, really good and have been since the beginning about drawing those boundaries. And I don't know where that came from. I must have just come in with that knowing sort of buried somewhere, but I've been really, it's been very easy for me to say, nope, not mine, not interested, don't care, go away. Like I have no problem sending visitors or information away because I'm just frankly not interested unless I'm asking for it.
So before you lead groups and stuff, do you open space? Do you have an opening ritual that you do before?
Not a ritual, but essentially what I'll do before is, 15, 20 minutes before, I'll sit in meditation and I'll connect with my team. And I'll ask, what is there specific things that the group needs today, aside from what we've already talked about sharing or what we're going to teach today. Sometimes what I find is that the beings, especially since I've started reconnecting with the lighted ones, there's times when they come in really strong and really powerfully. And I know it's going to be more of a channeling thing. And so I just close my eyes and let them do the talking essentially. So it's different, but I think because I, in the beginning, just really jumped in, like we were talking about earlier, I'll just jump and no, I guess it was someone else I was talking to earlier about this. Sometimes I just jump and learn how to fly on the way down. And that's how I approached my whole practice.
That was me.
Was it you?
I'm
Okay.
like that as well.
Okay. Yeah. So I think because that's how I began my practice, that has created a mechanism where all I have to do is show up. I don't have to invoke. I don't have to clear a space. I don't have to create anything. I don't have to banish or nope, just show up. And that's it. And it always comes through.
I like that. I do actually create a space. For myself, it feels, again, because it's part of my on-off switch, but, and maybe I'm going to have to revisit that. I'm open to that conversation, but it feels like I am giving the beings that I work with and the work that I'm doing a sense of reverence. Yeah. And so for me, and I tend to work with what a lot I call earth magic. Like I said, the animals and Mother Earth herself. And there's something about, and my opening space doesn't come from a very specific, it's kind of a whole bunch of different perspectives that I've kind of learned along the way, but I work a lot with the elements and I open the directions. And so there's a feel of like, Native American traditions, and there's a feel of paganism, and there's maybe I should have more purity in what I'm doing, but I just now I just follow where I feel led, and it feels good. Like in the beginning, I was reading books and okay, this is how you open a circle, and I was getting very left brain about it, and now I do what feels right. And was there certain perspectives that you leaned on more heavily when you were beginning this work?
Yeah. And for me, it was, when I first started, it was the same thing. It was just kind of a melting pot of everything that I think I had ever been curious about. I mean, when I was 13, I joined the American Wiccan Society and bought my first deck of tarot cards. I was well beyond what I even knew I was doing basically since birth. So for me, it's honestly just been, this library that I was born with internally, and I just draw on that. I've never specifically sought out a certain tradition, but I have certainly held on to things that I have been a part of, or, if I've been in a group and someone else has led a ceremony, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I like that. And I believe, and I love that we're talking about this because it really reminds me of it's just your personal relationship with the divine is what that spiritual relationship is. So for you and the being that you are that moves through Angela, that reverence and that structure and having those ceremonial aspects are important. For me, in the beginning, I was very irreverent and I was just kind of middle finger to all of it. And, that is fine in many ways. But what I did find was that there was a certain lack of humility, authentic humility, lacking in my practice. Well, Spirit made sure real quick that I was humbled along the path. And so I do bring a certain amount of reverence to it because I just have so much love and respect for my team. Number one, for fucking putting up with me. I mean, I am not an easy
I don't know about that. You seem like a pretty easygoing guy.
I don't know. In my dark moments when I'm middle fingers to the sky and fuck you all, I'm going to go work at the Gap. I've thrown some pretty epic tantrums. So I just have a great amount of respect for the fact that they're still with me. And just the work that they do. And I will say over the past couple of years, my own kind of reconnections and remembrance that have happened internally have brought a much deeper level of respect to it. And so for me, what is important is walking into a session or a class or a workshop or an interview like this, just with that respect. Right? I respect you for showing up with your opinions and your ideas. I respect the client for just being willing to face themselves, right? I respect whatever. So that to me is where I ground it all in, and respect for the individual, right? I'm not here to pick up your stuff. I'm not here to take accountability for your stuff. And I'm also not here to tell you what to do. So your choices, the only person that has to feel good about it is you. Now, in the beginning, I was very much on Abraham Hicks. That was kind of my first opening the door beyond Oprah and Chopra. And so I really watched a lot of Abraham Hicks in the beginning, which I think is a great sort of fundamental 101, place to start. At least it was for me. So that information was very instrumental in the foundation that I stand on, which is, you're the creator of all of it. You made a choice at some level. Everything you experience has been a choice. And that to me is sort of the nuts and bolts of everything. And I build on that.
Okay, so I have a couple places I want to go there. It's funny, Abraham Hicks, I only got into a little bit. It's funny that they talk about their beginnings working with the Ouija board. Mm-hmm. And part of, I think, where I come from with my on-off switch is because I used the Ouija board all the time when I was a kid, like really, and I really connected with some low-level some really yucky, some really yucky things.
Yeah.
And so at some point I realized, okay, I need to be a little bit more respectful. I need to be a little bit more intentional with what I'm doing. But now for me, part of the ritual, and when I love to create rituals, like for example, if there's something that I'm ready to let go of in my life, I'll sit down and I'll create a letting go ritual for that. And there's something really beautiful for me in that experience, just like we've talked about how, we love to cook and bake and make soaps and lotions and healing. There's something that I feel very connected to, but I also think it's important, especially for people in the beginning who want to play with tools of divination, that there is there's the respect and there's certain boundaries and stuff that you create. Do you agree with that?
I do. And what I tell people is just keep it simple and say, I'm only interested in connecting with frequencies of love or above. Ooh, and you can just make that just like, that's it. I have a friend who's a practitioner, and one of his mantras is everything is welcome, but only love can stay. So it creates a space where I'm not judging anything that you bring to the table, nor am I judging what may be hitchhiking or attached to you, right? It's all coming from the same place. And it's all within the context of the space that he opens, and anything can come in. It's just only love can stay. And so for me,
that's easy.
Yeah, love or above is one that I use a lot. And so, and actually, if now that I think about it, that is, as I'm sitting down with a client, calling in the fullness of all that I am, only here to connect with love or above. And that's pretty much all I say.
I have one that's slightly longer, but yeah, any guidance I receive in alignment with in alignment with divine light, divine love, and divine will. And I ask that I receive it with clarity, honesty, and integrity in my highest good, their highest good, the highest good of all. And then I thank the Divine Mother and the Divine Father and the creative force within. So I have a little thing that I say, and that's my on switch basically, is like, I'm sitting down and this is what I'm doing. Because I just, I think that it can be very fun and enticing to explore, a new deck of cards or working with a pendulum, or I don't know about the Ouija. Do you think that people can use the Ouija board in a high vibrational space? Or do you think that Ouija board's inherently...
I don't think it's inherently dark or bad. I think that you're cutting through. I just think you're setting yourself up for so much work up front, because you have to cut through that collective belief of what the Ouija board is. And to me, it's like a hammer. A hammer is just a hammer. You can build a house or you can kill a person. Like it'll do both jobs. So it's your intention is all that it is, really. But when we're talking about something so specific that has so much stuff just put on it,
yes,
don't start with the Ouija board. Go get a pair of Mother Mary Oracle cards or Jesus Loves You Tarot or whatever. Start with something that is intended to be high vibrational, that's wrapped in love and compassion. Because, recently I have been, finding myself face to face with some really funky, scary stuff. And now I'm fine. It doesn't scare me. But freaking 3 years ago, 5 years ago, it would have terrified me and I would have shut everything down. So yeah, make it easy on yourself. Go specifically for tools that are designed to bring in frequencies of love, and then just set that intention. Only love or above is allowed to connect through this media.
Yes, I absolutely agree with, the Ouija board. They make horror movies about that, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's got a lot of stuff tied into it.
Yeah.
I had connected with a lot of crap in my days before I knew anything about.
Yeah, because collective belief is really, really powerful, and it's hard to override. It takes a lot of effort.
When you do create rituals, like say that you're my example about you're ready to release something, would you sit down and write a ritual for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to, I do, and I have done rituals in my own life, and I do create them from time to time. And I used to, when I was living in LA, I was working with this metaphysical store and was doing like monthly, they did like a candle every month for either the horoscope, the birthday, or whatever. And so they were having me create rituals around like the solstice candle and then the equinox candle. And so I was just kind of pulling stuff out of the air. And I loved it. It's really, really empowering. It's such an exciting feeling when you're like, oh my gosh, like I can feel the elements coming together and like the energies are gathering. Like I find when I'm doing that, my team, whatever beings or level of intelligence I'm working with, gets really excited.
Do you differentiate between ritual and ceremony?
Well, yes and no. I mean, to me, a ritual is something that maybe you do once or, on the full moon or whatever. A ceremony, I feel, is more like your ceremony is, this is how you open the space. That's a ceremonial experience for you. So I think rituals can be ceremonial, but I think when I think of them, I think of as a ritual for something very specific. And something that is desired, either I want to get rid of it or call it in.
Okay.
And ceremony is more like, here we are opening the space. Ba, 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 ba.
When I talked to Dakota Earthwalker, she would say that rituals are just like little interactions. Like, for example, like, I'm outside and I got a lot of junk in my field and I connect briefly to the wind and ask for the wind, the air element to blow out. And she would call that a ritual. So anything where you open space, she would call a ceremony. And so rituals, but for me, because I've learned from different traditions, like specific rituals that are used for, a specific order or something like that. And so, again, coming from different perspectives and the way those words have been used. But I would call I'm creating like a release ritual, that would be, it probably would be quite ceremonial. But yeah, it would be designed for a specific intent, a specific purpose.
I like that. I like that differentiation. I don't think I've ever really thought about it, but yeah, that's a really beautiful way to look at it.
Yeah, I agree. So, yeah, love or above. I like that. I think that's really simple.
Yeah. And, when it comes to creating ceremony or ritual, like I know it can be so confusing and I know that it can feel so daunting. So what I do is when I first started, especially, it was really because it was, these candles were also tied to astrological occurrences. So I was doing a lot of things for new moon, a lot of things for full moon. So people can just if you want to release something, do it around the full moon, because the full moon is all about like culmination. And if you're doing it on the full moon and then the full moon begins to wane, right, starts to minimize, then you're essentially setting the intention that whatever it is you're releasing or letting go of is now going to be drained as the moon is drained of its light. The new moon is the new beginning, right? It's planting the seeds, it's sowing the seeds, setting the intention, clearing the space. Think of the elements. Fire is transformation. Air is thought and higher levels of awareness. Earth is balance and stability. Water is emotion and cleansing. So just with that information alone, you can create a ton of stuff. You can use icons or avatars, for abundance. If you want to do abundance ritual, get a bunch of coins. I worked with a woman years ago who had these beautiful rituals she would do with money. She would actually wash her money and she would actually take a bath with her money. And then she would make the sound of the shaking coins because the sound of the coins activates that energy coming in because it's sticky, right? It's magnetic. She had amazing insights. I don't know if I want to take a bath with my money, but I love the idea. You could certainly pick a coin as the avatar for money and just, drop one of those in the water, whatever. There's a million ways you can go about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would be with money, but I like the idea because part of ritual is raising the energy, right? Is the magnetizing, the affinity of like attracting like. And so I can understand that idea of shaking the money as a way to build
activate
that energy
and call it in.
Interesting.
Yeah. And she would actually do that. She would walk around a space just with coins in her hands, and she would, instead of clearing the space, she was activating the abundance energy in the space. And like the coins, her belief was that the coins hear each other. And so when the coins and the money energy hears other coins having a party, ooh, I want to come, I want to join. Man, she never was poor. She always had money. And, I think that intention, this is the other thing. I think intention is 90% of it.
Yeah.
I believe the universe is so forgiving. The deities and the beings and the intelligences that people usually think of when they're thinking of a ritual, they're so forgiving. As long as it's grounded in love and your intention is, I'm really wanting to do this thing. If you mess it up, say a word wrong, okay, it's not like you're going to be struck down. Like, I think it's a beautiful way, like you were talking about opening the door, like ritual and ceremony, especially if it's one you're creating for yourself, it's a beautiful way to open that door. Mm-hmm. It really is.
There's something about it that when I started writing rituals, I was like, there's something in me that's been doing this for a very, very long time. Yeah. And it started to make a lot of sense. And I would find that as I started to do rituals, and we talked about like, Andrew has gained a level, like anytime you receive an upgrade. And I find that using rituals is one of the best ways to connect with those upgrades. But in the beginning, when I would have an upgrade, I would also be attacked after. Yeah. Especially in my dream space. And that was the last thing I wanted to end on is dreams. So when I was a kid, I had a lot of dreams, basically of the dark side calling me. A lot of dreams like that. From when I was a little kid up until I was in my late 20s, until I started to be able to, I would see like light coming out of my palms and I would fight. But when I started doing this work and the rituals, every single time I would go in my dream space, I would be attacked in some regard until I was like, okay, this doesn't work for me anymore. I'm going to turn and we're going to figure this out. And I was wondering, did you ever have those experiences of feeling like when you've received an upgrade that there was some repercussion, I guess?
What I found is, for me, it was always in the midst of the upgrade that the turmoil would occur, because it was the small self, limited self, human self, Andrew, essentially. And all of those defenses would rear up and all of that stuff would be like, and my body would just go into like sentinel, guardian, shut it down, pull the curtains, draw the door. I mean, all of it, it was like, no. And so for me, the demons that I had to battle was myself. It really was, because I would sideswipe myself. I would sabotage myself. I would derail myself over and over and over. And that was even before I knew it was happening. And then once I got into it and started to have these experiences, there was so much fear that and I get this, right? The body, when we're encountering frequencies that we've never experienced consciously, the body only knows fight or flight in the beginning. It's just like, are you a helper or a herder kind of thing? And so anything that was foreign, it was always threat assessment mode. So for me, it was, I now know that when I'm wrestling with myself, it's because I'm in the midst of an upgrade and there's more stuff being scraped off the bottom as, more of the true self descends. So it was never post that. It was always in the midst of it that I would have the turmoil and the anguish.
Interesting. And I've had this conversation actually with many people about my experiences. Like when I'm talking about dreams, I'm talking about pre-kindergarten, they started.
Wow.
And different people have said all demons are your demons. So everything is a manifestation of your own fear. Then I've had people say, no, that was probably, because I think that there are things out there that are not of the highest light and intention. I think everything eventually, if you go back far enough, came from source. But as it had individuated, as we talked about, some things took different paths than others. Yeah. And so, this is a debate I've had with many kind of teachers and spiritual guides over And everyone's always had their own kind of perspective on it, whether all fear is your fear or all demons are your demons. And I actually don't know where exactly I landed on all of that either.
I recently have come to this idea, and my approach has been, because in the past few months, I have cleared some really nasty, funky stuff from my field, stuff that I didn't even know was around, stuff that afterwards I was like, how have I even been alive this whole time? But the way I look at it now is I see what we would call a demon or an entity or a funky, chunky spirit. I just see them as travelers who got lost. I see that within their world, they're not a demon. They're just a person. They're just a being. They're just whatever you are in that world. And somehow they've gotten lost. Either they were attracted to the light and they were like, ooh, shiny, pretty, bright over there. Or perhaps maybe there was an agreement that an ancestor had, or somewhere else in your soul lineage, you made an agreement in the 1400s for whatever, for power control. So whatever the reason is, I look at them now just as scared children. I just look at them as like, imagine if you woke up in a world where the sky was purple, gravity was upside down, and everyone had a head on their shoulder. Like, you would be freaking terrified. You would be running around panicked, terrorizing people, looking for anyone to help you make sense of it. And what are you probably going to be drawn to? The lightest, brightest light that you can find. Because I think we're all innately, as beings, we're drawn to the light. So the way that I look at them now is, I'm not trying to get rid of it. I'm not trying to banish it. I'm actually calling it in so that I can heal it. It can go back to where it needs to go. Because if I'm just banishing it, I haven't done anything. That's a leaf blower. That's essentially just blowing my leaves to your side of the street and saying that I've done some work. No, actually, I've just sort of, offloaded my responsibility to you now. And what are you going to do tomorrow? You're going to blow the leaves back on my side of the street. But if we heal the thing, if we heal the being, the entity, the whatever, and call in our team to support us, that's a totally different experience. So I no longer see it as an adversarial or frightening or scary thing. I just see it as a lost kid who needs help finding his way home.
That's a good perspective. Yeah, I would agree that I get the visual of like the moth to flames. And that's why I always kind of thought, as soon as I would kind of open a new door for myself, that there was like a reinvigoration. But that doesn't happen as much anymore as it used to when I was much younger, in my 20s for sure. Yeah, interesting. I like the idea though that they're just lost. They're just lost.
Yeah. And for me, psychologically, it also creates a reality where I can come from love and compassion instead of fear and like trying to get away. And it also then energetically puts me in the position of one who is in the authority. Yeah. Because let's face it, if you're hanging on to my field, you are not invited. I am the authority. You are not welcome. It is not okay for you to be here. Now, I'm not going to banish you. I'm not going to send you into the darkness. I'm actually going to pull you in and say, all right, honey, we're going to send you back home. So for me, psychologically, it just, because I remember like in the beginning, I was so scared of everything. I would go to bed and it was like shield around my body, shield around the bed, shield around the room, shield around my apartment, then the building. I had shields on shields on shields. So, and that just carries so much fear energy. So for me to just see it as a little kid who's lost and needs help finding home.
And fear is
makes
such
it a lot easier.
Such a distorting thing. The last thing, have you ever experienced what they call sleep paralysis, but they used to call them hag attacks?
Yes.
Where you wake up and you feel like something's on your chest. Mm-hmm. Well, I used to get those all the time too when I was younger, and I would explain these to people and nobody had the experience. So then I started looking into the forums and stuff, and somebody said, and this is the distorting thing of fear, because when you would wake up and you'd feel like you can't move and you had something on your chest, like there would be all sorts of terrible visual and auditory hallucinations that would go along with that. Mm. And then one time I was reading in a forum and they said, like, see if you can move past your fear. And I was like, well, how is that possible? I got something like sitting on my chest, right? And I did. And then I would have the most amazing lucid dreaming experiences. But it was interesting now to realize how my fear distorted that whole experience, right? So like, as soon as I was like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of this, the hallucinations, both auditory and visual, disappeared. And now all of a sudden I could have, I could go sit on top of the pyramid if I wanted or whatever. Like
Totally.
it's such a distorting factor.
It absolutely is. And it's interesting when you're talking about that, because in The Lost Art of Resurrection, that Freddie Silva book, and also in the Drunvalo Melchizedek books, he talks about this, how in those Egyptian mystery schools, how the facing of the fear was sort of the final gateway. Because otherwise you're not going to be able to make it into the other world. You're not going to be able to make it into that master's realm because, and this is, isn't this idea of facing your dragon, right? Your final fear. It's a thread in so many cultures and so many of these traditions that all sort of revolve around this idea that it's the fear that feeds on your belief in it. The minute that you pull the plug and go, oh, you're just a little kid who's lost. You're not a scary devil. Oh, then it just sucks the life right out of it.
Absolutely.
So I like that. Just, if I just face my fear, then it goes away.
Mm-hmm. You can have crazy ass lucid dreams. Fantastic.
And go sit on the pyramid.
Exactly.
Love it.
All right. Well, that was fantastic again, too. Every time we talk about something completely different.
Yes, I love our chats.
What will come up for next time, but
who knows? Maybe we'll get a Ouija board.
Or we'll both just sit here and automatic write.
Yeah, totally.
Freak people out.
I love that. This was lovely. Thank you, my friend.
You are welcome. Are you enjoying this podcast and want to help this lady out? Well, share it with friends, or even better, leave a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you. Now back to the show. Well, that is the show for today. I want to thank you again for listening. If you like what you hear, please think of subscribing or leaving a review on iTunes. All of that helps. I'm so grateful for the people that have done that. Next week, we're going to have Jill Mattson on talking about sound healing. And yeah, I think that's it. Well, take care and seek the mystery.